Hey friends, I'm Sabrina, the rookie around here. John and Dick are the old school American fans of F1. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation we had about the 2023 British Grand Prix. Quali's drying track certainly added to the excitement. Development efforts continue to come into focus. The safety car had an impact. British F1 fans rightfully celebrated. The guys and I evaluate this weekend's historic race that is a highlight of the F1 calendar. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Gentlemen, the British Grand Prix. To me, the highlights of the year, one of them is the British Grand Prix. So I am super excited. This race was fantastic. Precursor to anybody who's going to be listening to this conversation. You can probably tell my joy in this race. Let's get right to it. Let's talk about free practice. Yes, no?
Not so much.
Dick?
Yeah, not so much for me either.
Okay. Quali? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then we'll get into the Grand Prix. Dick, why don't you tell us, what did you see for Quali that got you excited for Grand Prix Day?
There was a number of things. And the first thing you have to talk about is the impact of a drying track and the fact that especially as the session went on, the track was gripping up. And so whatever lap time you might have set even 2 minutes ago, really was fairly meaningless because everybody was going faster with each successive lap as the track got better and better and better. This caught poor old Checo Perez out. He was the first to go out to set a time there in Q1, right there towards the end. He led like the whole field out. Well, he went out, set a time, went to the top of the charts. Of course, when he went across the line, it was almost time for a checkered flag to come out. The poor guy didn't get another full complete lap. In the meantime, everybody else was flying and he just sank like a rock and wound up, I think his final qualifying position was 16th, I think. So he just made it, he just almost made it out of Q1. So really felt sorry for him. Not really sure why the team sent him out when they did, because certainly Max didn't get hung out to dry like that. So I thought that was a really interesting scenario, very unfortunate for him. But I thought it was amazing how that track gripped up so quickly right there at the end. And it made for a while, a very scrambled order. Although I think, what we wound up with was something that was, while there were some surprises like the McLarens and the Williams too, actually, I thought it was actually fairly indicative of what everybody was capable of, but it was all shaded a little bit by, just the fact that it kind of depended on where you went out for that last session, particularly in Q1.
John, anything you want to add, or you want to move on to the Grand Prix?
Oh, I'd only add that it's just so exciting when you see it and you know that every lap is going to be faster than the next, and every person who's coming across the line after that person who just passed is going to be faster too, or potentially at least. And so it's very exciting. I thought about Quali, what someone else said, which is everybody at this race, everybody was better in qualifying. Some were better than others, but everybody was better.
Yeah, I think so. To me, as I watched it, I thought, oh, wow, I can't wait for tomorrow. Like I kept looking at the clock thinking, how many hours do we have? This is going to be so much fun, especially with Lando getting on P2 and Oscar getting P3. I thought, I would never have thought this would happen, at least not this year. So that was fantastic quality session. So let's move on to Grand Prix. John, tell me, who caught your eye?
Well, I'm kind of back to the same problem. Everybody actually caught my eye. When you watch the times in free practice and in qualifying, everybody was very, very close. And it was a great performance, I thought, especially by Norris, Albon. I thought Sargent did extremely well. Piastri, what a comer that kid is going to be. But I just thought everybody really did well. Those four caught my eye particularly.
Dick, what about you?
I think that I would have to echo what John was saying. I will say I was surprised at how Ferrari struggled in the race. Mm-hmm. You kind of figure those guys are going to be there or thereabouts, even though you know that ultimately it's all going to end in tears. This time,
you're telling me.
Yeah, right. And so, from my perspective, I really felt like that Ferrari just wasn't there. They were there, but they weren't there. It was just really mysterious because it wasn't like they qualified horribly, but man, their race pace sure wasn't anything to write home about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was kind of surprised. I know that I saw a stat at some point that said Charles had done really good on something related, I think, during Quali. So overnight before the race, I thought, could he do something great? But watching the race, I thought, this is not your race. This is not Ferrari's race by any means. It really was the story of McLaren and their resurgence. And I was surprised at another team where I was expecting them to really bring it, which would be Aston. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because, we're certainly seeing the development war in full speed now. And I think what's interesting is, and John talked about this the last time, which is, Aston Martin got the car right, but they're learning how to win. And so they're going to make strategy errors. They're going to lag behind in development. And give you a great example, there had been talk, big update package coming up for Aston Martin. It'll be ready for Silverstone. It's going to put them on par with Red Bull, blah, 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 blah. So we heard all that kind of stuff. So what did Aston Martin show up with? Well, they showed up with a front wing that they thought was more Silverstone specific. There was no other updates. I think this is a good indicator of the fact that Aston Martin is lagging behind in the development wars, and the teams that are used to the development, which would be Red Bull, which would be McLaren, you think about the kind of resources they have, you think about Mercedes, those guys have all taken a step, and it's most visible with obviously McLaren, but also Mercedes. You think about how well both of those teams performed at Austria, and then you look at how they performed here at Silverstone. And then you compare that to Aston Martin, and you can start seeing the chinks in Aston Martin's armor. They got it right at the beginning of the year, but they've not been able to go and figure out, okay, where are our next areas of development? And so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when they go to the Hungaroring, because now it's starting to look like the Aston Martin may be a track specific car where it's really good at some tracks and not so good at others. But we've seen Austria, a fast track. We've seen Silverstone, a really fast track. Aston Martin wasn't so great. They finished 5th and 7th in those two races. What are they going to do in Hungary? And what does this mean for Spa? McLaren, on the other hand, in an interview, Christian Horner says, yes, McLaren is really good on this track, which means he's saying, I don't think they're going to be all that great at the Hungaroring. It's not Monaco, but it's getting towards Monaco, which certainly Silverstone is not. And so he's kind of like, I'm not sure that we have anything to worry about with those guys. What does that mean for Mercedes? I don't know, because they may be track specific still as well. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. And as we've talked before, when they go on their summer break, which is after Spa, so we've got a week off and then I believe a back-to-back with the Hungaroring and Spa. That should give us all the information we need to know about what the rest of the year is going to look like, other than the fact that unless somebody breaks Max's legs, I don't see him losing. Long-winded answer, but that's...
No, I don't think it's a long-winded answer. I think it's a very good answer that at this point in the season, it's important that we hear this kind of analysis to both manage expectations moving forward, but also to assess what we see happening. So that's really good. John, Dick mentioned fast track, and I want to ask you, what are your thoughts when it comes to the development?
Well, on the development side, Silverstone is a track where only 15% of the lap is under braking. So this track, because of the long straights and the fast nature of the track, we really get a chance, especially for the new person, to see engine development. What we see from the lap times now, it doesn't take into account the power curve and some of those sorts of things that will change how quickly you get to speed. But in terms of outright power and speed, almost all the manufacturers have got the engines tuned up to fare thee well. There's, I think, 1.5 seconds was as much as covered the entire field in qualifying, if I remember correctly. So we're really seeing seeing the pinnacle of engine development right now. And I don't think there really probably won't be any real gains in horsepower. There'll be some efforts to tune the engine to specific tracks so that the power is applied and torque and all of those kind of things advantageously. But what I think we see is that the cars are all very, very equal in terms of engine development at this point. And that's a good thing to see and to know at a track like this.
What about Williams? They seem to be pretty good this weekend.
They were very good. I mean, hats off to Albon. He was just on it all the time. Now, they were probably a bit light in qualifying, but, when they turned their race performance in, especially Albon, that was a great finish for him. So it wasn't just fuel load in qualifying. They were really quick on this track. We do kind of expect that because Dick has mentioned before, Williams is really, really a fast car on the straight line speed. So this track really played to them. It'll be interesting to see if they've managed any updates or development that will help them on the other tracks as we come into more handling tracks.
So then my other question then would be, what, if any, data do we gather from this week's race in combination with everything we've already seen that helps us to understand, where the championship is going? Especially as Dick highlighted, we have this off week and then we have two more weeks. How do we kind of place this week's data?
There's nothing new at the front. Red Bull is going to win the championship. If Checo gets halfway to decent, or if they replace him with someone who can, they're going to win the manufacturers championship easily. I'm with Dick. If they don't break Verstappen's legs, he's going to win this thing going away. Mm-hmm. However, if you go back just a couple of teams, there's with McLaren, if they really have kind of unlocked the key to their chassis, Lando clearly is on a charge now, and he's going to be much more motivated. Piastri was right there with him, and we'll talk about the safety car later and how that affected him. But Piastri drove a fantastic race today. That team could move up in the manufacturers championship very quickly. They're about 100 points behind Ferrari, and if they don't stop their business, I thought we might see fireworks on the track today when Charles passed Sainz, and they were really close there. But at any rate, the drivers' championship, the McLaren drivers could move up in that. Probably will if Lance Stroll doesn't improve quite a bit. Lando's going to take him and move up in a pole position in the drivers' championship. So I think that not the first and maybe not the second place in the championship, but down the line from there, it's everybody's game right now.
Listening to the two of you over these last weeks, I feel a high level of confidence of saying none of these guys are going to be able to push out Max from P1. But the fun that we're going to get to watch when it comes to racing will be in every other spot in the midfield, both in the constructors and the drivers' championships. I do agree with you. The Ferrari, the only word I can think of is cat fight between the two of them. But not as screechy. I was thinking, oh no, this may lead to some sad stuff coming up if this continues. But the McLaren and the Aston positioning this week was so surprising and so cool. And I also loved seeing Williams come out and show some stuff that I wasn't expecting, but I'm really happy for them after what we've seen over these last few years, if this can start to bring them up, which, as I was thinking about it, it seems like this James Vowles changeover, and maybe there's other factors at play, but I'm hoping that the culture aspect that he might be doing inside of Williams, plus his technical experience, those two married with an Alex who wants to prove himself and a Logan who also wants to prove himself, maybe that all, if it's given enough time, it can ripen into something that brings Williams back into the middle of the pack. Okay, so here's another question talking about Logan and Oscar, and we didn't really talk about Nick too much. I really didn't know how to evaluate Logan's performance in the Williams this week, but what I wanted to see is if we can pin that for a future conversation that we have coming up regarding rookies, because I think we should have a deeper dive. You guys good with that?
Sure thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think the three rookies at this point, it would be a nice thing to talk about where they are, how to evaluate them, because there's been so much discussion, I think, in the F1 sports commentary world about these three guys, and leading into our summer break, that would be a nice thing to kind of have to evaluate what we will see coming in from all the media. But let's talk specifically of the Grand Prix race and of the safety car and tire strategy. There were some interesting moments, and I told you guys this offline. The safety car itself, the timing and the way that it all happened made me think this is why I love racing, is these variables that are out of the control of the drivers and the teams, like weather, but safety car as well, is where you get to see how people react under pressure, these highly disciplined, highly trained drivers and teams. Dick, what is your thoughts about like the tire strategy and the safety car?
Pretty interesting, because the safety car came out. Well, let me back up. So Hulkenberg's car stops on the side of the road. And originally, they went with a virtual safety car. Now, Max had a 9-second lead at that time over Lando. And under the rules with a virtual safety car, if it's a 9-second gap to the guy in front of you, then that's the gap that you have to maintain. You're going to slow down, but you're not going to slow down to, safety car speed. You're just going to slow down to some percentage of what your race pace was. And you got to maintain the gap. Well, everybody was sitting there saying, okay, everybody's going slower. Now's the time to pit. Let's go. And McLaren made the decision that their strategy all along was, hey, we're going to go on with a new set of hards when we go in and bring Lando into pit. So Lando's just turned onto pit road, and the race officials change it and say, nope, we're going to get rid of the virtual safety car. We're going to a full-on safety car. Well, when you go to the full-on safety car, that means that that 9-second lead that Max had is gone. In this case, when they got back out on track, that means that Lando, if he wants, could have his nose right up Max's gearbox, basically. And so that 9-second lead is gone. The problem is that in this scenario, a lot of people have said, well, why did they put him on hards? Why not put him on softs? Lighter fuel load. Now you got a shot at fighting for the lead. Wouldn't you go with softs? And the answer would be yes. But the problem is that they had already laid out for the hard tires. The soft tires that were available were used softs that were sitting at the opposite end of the garage. So they didn't have time to bring Lando in, stop him, send the crew to the back, grab the tires, the soft tires, bring them back out. And remember, you got to have, you can't put the right front tire on the left front and vice versa, because those tires are directional. So you have to make sure that you're putting the right tire on the right corner. The decision was made in a split second, back to kind of your point, Sabrina, about how things can change and you got to react under pressure. And so when they did, they opted to stay with the hard tires because it was the least risky proposition for them to take. Red Bull, on the other hand, said, no, we're going with softs, because we have got, when we go green again, we have got to stretch out a lead beyond 1 second in order to get out of the DRS zone. But remember, they get 2 laps where DRS is deactivated after they go green again. So there's 2 laps for Max to put in a couple of blistering laps on those soft tires. And they were brand new soft tires, I believe. And so this was like a qualifying run for him, whereas Lando, drive the car hard and all that, but he's not going to be Max in a Red Bull on soft tires. I think my perspective is because of that hard tire decision, then poor old Lando was basically, gone into a bear fight with a switch, so to speak. So he really didn't have much chance. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is when the safety car pulled off, apparently these guys in Formula One aren't really sure how to do a rolling start, because Max took off, and I don't know what Lando was thinking, but Max was pretty much at full chat and probably had 100 yards on Lando before Lando was like, oh yeah, I guess I need to speed up. I was really surprised at how he got caught napping. But anyway, I think that was pretty much the defining point. And of course, the safety car also caught out Piastri, because had that safety car not happened, Piastri probably would have finished third and Hamilton would have finished fourth. But as it was, Mercedes was able to take advantage of the timing. Piastri was not. Lewis was able to jump him just by pit strategy.
Yeah. One quick thing. I think you said Hulkenberg, but I think you meant Magnussen for the safety
Was it
car.
Magnussen pulled it?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
Magnussen. Yeah.
Okay. My fault.
Yeah, that's okay. But the other piece that I wanted to step back and so you're saying, well, I had the same reaction that most people did of like, why are they putting hards on
Right.
him right now? But now listening to how you broke it down, that makes a lot of sense. And this is where I think we as listeners, especially new listeners, have to give a little bit more credit to the team, except Ferrari, but every other team on the grid of like, there's usually a lot of data analysis and strategizing and looking at where other people's gaps are, where you're going to come out of the pit, all those different pieces. And it sometimes just comes to the call that you make at that moment. And I don't think anyone could have seen that safety car would have converted to a virtual and sorry, I said it backwards, a virtual converting into a safety car at that literal second.
Yep.
I did not know what you had just said about the tires being specific to the position. I've always wondered that, looking at the tire blanket and saying left front, right front, and thought, why do they need that? But so thank you for giving that piece of information to me. I imagine other people who are listening didn't know that either.
Yeah, the tires are directional.
Yeah, it makes complete sense when you say that, but I never quite put those two pieces together. And here's what I am glad for McLaren, that they were able to make that call and it played out well. What I could have seen if this had been Ferrari is that they would have made the decision 10 seconds too late, and then they would have been fumbling it, and then it would have been like a 20-second pit stop. What I was quite impressed was McLaren's pit stop at that moment. I think it was like 2.4 or 2.3 seconds. And considering now what we're hearing was going on in the garage, all the more impressive that they were able to keep their calm and make that decision and get him on, and the drivers did their best. I do think the person who got shortchanged in all of this is unfortunately Mr. Oscar, but he still got the best place he's ever gotten in Formula One. I'm excited for him. It's like bittersweet, right? And I did appreciate that Lando acknowledged, even as he was winning his spot, that Oscar should have been right up there with him. John, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, there were 2 points I wanted to make on this, and one was about the tire strategy specifically with McLaren, and that is that they do not have much data on tire degradation with this car. And so it really was, in addition to the things that Dick has mentioned, the lack of data on how those tires would degrade if they put the softs on would have been somewhat uncertain. And so I think they made the very best choice, given the fact that they just don't have much data on the degradation. The other thing that I was going to say about this is this really illustrates the 2.2 second or 2.4 second pit stop by McLaren. It illustrates to those who are new to the sport how a team has to learn to win. And although we don't think of McLaren as one of the leading teams right now, they have a long history of being a leading team, and they still see themselves as a leading team, and they train their pit crews and they practice with a winning attitude and with the culture that they have. And whereas Aston Martin, on the other hand, is still learning and coming up to speed on those things.
Yep.
I think that's a great point. Let's talk about the celebration itself. I mean, what an outstanding moment. I think I read online 480,000 plus people were in attendance, the most highly attended British Grand Prix. Those people are going to be talking about this race, I think, for quite some time, because the Brits had a lot to celebrate with Mercedes and McLaren, Lewis and Lando. I mean, I was consuming a lot of media in the immediate aftermath of the race, and even just the way that Lando. Okay, so let me step back and say this. I'm always going to be a Charles fangirl. That said, Lando this week, especially maybe because I had listened to a podcast interview he had done, his story and his personality, I could see why a lot of people cheer him on. And then to watch this weekend and see how he conducted himself, I was standing up and applauding his race. He's a young man that we should all be paying attention to more. This celebration was well deserved. I don't know what you guys thought.
I think absolutely. I mean, and I've shared this with y'all offline. A friend of mine that, and John knows this fellow, his name's Martin Stone, very accomplished karter who was Lando's mechanic back in the UK in karting when Lando was just a little kid, and they've stayed in touch. And Martin hits 1 or 2 Grand Prix as Lando's guest for the weekend, and gets the full access and all that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, he's right there in the middle of it, of course. And I was lucky enough to hear a voice message that Lando left for Martin's young daughter, who clearly she is eclipsed you, Sabrina, as a fangirl, because she is definitely a Lando fangirl. And just the care and the genuine kindness that Lando showed to this little girl, and I don't know how old she is, 5, 6 years old probably, says a lot, and said a lot to me about the quality individual that he is. So yeah, it was really great to see him have that success, especially after the struggles they've had so far this year with that car.
I think it was about a year and a half ago, I was listening to some old episodes of a podcast, because this is how much I have gone down the F1 hole. Like, I want to see stuff that was put out 5-7 years ago. Lando had given a interview there, and I remember when I listened to that, I thought, really like this kid. I want to see him succeed, when he talked about his sacrifices and how dedicated, like how truly focused his life has been on the world of karting and racing. And then to see him in McLaren and not getting further along, that was last year. Then to have this episode this week come out, it reminded me how much I liked this kid. Then to see how he behaved in the quali after the race and he was doing the interviews, I thought it was hilarious how he said Max messed everything up. He can be so disciplined and a competitor, but yet he doesn't take it too seriously. That was one of the things I took away from the podcast, and then watching it, his quality behavior. And then on the podium, to see how he was so excited when they were trying to give him the gold, or they were trying to give the gold cup, I think, to Max. Mohammed bin Salman, I guess the timing of it, because that's not a normal trophy you see everywhere. Lando had already started the champagne out of order, and it just was so endearing to watch this. And you could see Lewis's love and respect. Maybe love's the wrong word, but his respect and joy for Lando. It felt like a big brother kind of seeing, your kid brother bested you, but that's okay, because it was a hard one and the kid deserved it. And to see Max as well, like when they're in the cool down room and they were talking, I kept thinking, this is again the next generation of racers, even though there's not that big of an age gap between Max and Lando, but definitely between Lewis and Lando. I just thought this kid is what we want to see emulated in society. And then I heard that Lando stayed until like 10 o'clock at the track, signing things, talking to people. I saw a video of him talking to a little 3 or 4-year-old kid. I mean, that after the day that he's had, the weekend that he's had, and yes, they're paid the big bucks. I get that. But if we're talking about sports role models and what we want kids to think about, or just in general, humans in society, who are the people that we're putting up as examples? Lando very much exemplified that this week. And I think that when I look out at the crowd and see how many people were wearing his paraphernalia, I thought, I want to take note of this and be, again, I'm always going to be a Charles fangirl, but I can give double loyalty and say, Lando, keep going. I want to see people who are setting examples for us in this world that we can say, hey, that's good. Okay, so well Dick said he was long-winded. I just was long-winded, and I get that. But then I'm a new Lando fangirl, so I'm allowed that, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. John, what are your thoughts about a new fan, and what should they be keeping in mind when it comes to this race?
Well, first, let me give a shout out, since y'all were so long-winded on that. Let me give a shout out to the British fans, because they had a great day. McLaren, Mercedes, Aston Martin, Williams, all of those teams really showed well and gave the British fans quite a lot to be happy about and cheerful for. Obviously, 480,000 of them were there. I've been to that race. I've been to that track. I can only imagine how many hours it was to get out of that racetrack after all of that.
That's why, because Lando was staying late, he had plenty of fans still there.
You know he was taking the helicopter out of there.
Oh,
So what should the new fans take from this track? Well, I think Dick should talk about the history of this track, but this is, as you mentioned right in the beginning, this is a really favorite track. This is the epicenter of Formula One racing. So many of the teams I've already mentioned before are based in or around Silverstone. It's their home track. This is one of those races that absolutely has to stay on the calendar no matter what. It's a tremendous event. It's a tremendous event to go to if you're a Formula One fan and you want to go to one or two races. I mean, Monaco is a great one. Spa is a great one. This one is a great one. This one should definitely be on your top 3 or 4 to go to. It's a great race to watch on TV. You just cannot imagine, unless you go to that track and stand on the inside or outside of one of these corners, just how fast these guys are taking those turns. They are really, really moving when they go through there. And it's an amazing thing to watch.
Dick, you have anything to add?
no, I mean, after that, I mean, I don't know that there's anything you can add in terms of just what Silverstone means to F1. Thing to remember is that this track hosted the first race of a real F1 World Championship in 1950. It was a Royal Air Force bomber base from World War II. And, a group of enthusiasts came together and said, yeah, well, this would make a great track. And so basically the original track design is, even though some of the corners are still there, it does not, the track today bears no resemblance to the original track, because the original track was literally composed of 2 runways and the taxiways that connected them. And so what you had was a track that raced a whole lot like an oval, long straightaways, fast corners, legendary stuff in the late 60s, early 70s, where these guys would be going through 5, 6 cars, all slipstreaming, because let's face it, there wasn't just a whole lot of turbulence coming off of those cars, because the wings either were non-existent or they were just starting to explore them. And so that made for quite a spectacle. I mean, the cars were literally drifting through corners at 150 miles an hour, or some crazy speed like that. And then over time, the British Racing Drivers Club, they, one way or another, they were able to raise enormous amounts of money to upgrade this track, because they were at one stage in danger of losing it because it was starting to get outdated and all that. They put in a lot of new facilities, grandstands, and they completely redid the track, reconfigured it. A lot of the track that you saw today did not exist back in the 1950s. So, if you think about it in these terms, you have Monaco, which is virtually unchanged. There's the swimming pool complex. And that was about all there was that has been added to Monaco. So what they raced on in 1929 from a configuration standpoint, pretty much the same as what they raced on in 2023. Silverstone, that's not the case. There are remnants of the track, like they talked about the Hangar Straight and Beckett's. And some of those corners, well, those were corners that were there on the original track. But then things like all those S turns that you have after going through the first couple of turns, I think it picks up at like turn 3 and goes on for several corners. All of that did not exist in the original configuration. So what a cool track, amazing history. And like John said, I mean, it's really the epicenter of Formula One, at least for Formula One, and certainly one of the most important tracks in the world.
I agree. I mean, I just love it. I think I told you both when I did the sim racing, my first one that I did was Silverstone, and I just loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. Yeah, it's so great. Okay. Talking about airfield, social media specifically, I saw something and it made me think of something you have told us in the past, Dick, which is that you have equated the racer mentality and the fighter mentality to be very similar. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if you saw this, but George Russell got to go up into British Air Force fighter jets this week.
Yep.
Thought that was kind of cool.
It was very cool. Well, and one of the things that he said that was so interesting is that he's not used to pulling G's where it's pulling down through the center of your body like you would in a fighter. He's used to the G's of going lateral on him, slamming him from the left to the right. Well, you get that in the fighter too, but he had not experienced pulling a whole bunch of G's going straight through his spine. So he said that was a bit of a difference. And of course, he was suited up in a G suit, which, has the pneumatic cuffs like around the calves to keep the blood from pooling in your feet and blacking you out, that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, the video was pretty impressive.
John, did you see any of this? Any thoughts on it?
Well, I would just, the airplane that he was flying in, I believe, was a Red Arrows, and that's their performance team that flies over the track, at the red, white, and blue. Obviously British red, white, and blue, not American red, white, and blue. When those guys overfly the field, they come down the front straight, and they're only about 300 feet off the deck, and it is very, very loud and impressive when they come through there.
That is so cool. Okay, last thing that I will bring up, because I feel like it's going to be something we'll be hearing more about. We've already heard a little bit about, which is the movie filming crew, Brad Pitt. Did y'all see any of that stuff?
I can hardly wait. Be still my beating heart.
I mean, I'm keeping an open mind. I'm hoping that with Lewis being a producer, that he will keep it as a true example of F1 side of a movie. Now, Grand Prix, right? Isn't that the movie you told me about, Dick, in your origin story? That is a good film to watch if we're wanting to learn about speed and see, and that's from decades ago. Yep. So that's going to be what will equate this new movie to, in my opinion, with all the new technology we have now in filmmaking. You would imagine, for anybody who's listening, Dick and John and I all did our origin stories as to F1. And in my conversation with Dick, he answered my question as to films and books and things that any of us who are new should be watching or reading. And so Grand Prix was the movie, and you'll just have to hear what he had to say, why that's good. So that's a plug for a previous episode. And so who knows, maybe we'll be recommending Brad Pitt's movie. And there, I did see Carlos looks like he might be in there, and Martin Brundle gave a interview with Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt was very respectful, and he said he really wants to do justice to F1, and he said, my character is supposed to be racing around the time that you were on the track. So it seems like they're not trying to do modern era, which I think is also very fascinating considering the car that we saw, unless it's like a flashback. So all that to say, to be determined, but hopeful that it'll be an honor to the world of F1. Gentlemen, anything else that you think we have missed, or have we got it down for the British Grand Prix?
I think we have it.
I think we're there.
Awesome. Okay, because we sad, but also okay, because we realize the traveling circus needs to have a break. We do not have a race coming up. This conversation will have to last for 2 weeks. Then we will have the Hungara Ring. Correct, Dick? That's the next calendar.
Yep.
Okay, so that'll be our next conversation. In the meantime, we will have some other episodes that will load. Specifically, we hope that we will get some conversations on the rookies, because I think that this is the time for us to, as newbies, understand better the rookies. Thank you so much for another conversation regarding a Grand Prix, and specifically the British Grand Prix. Okay, friends, what did you think about the amazing British Grand Prix? What do you think about the development war? What about McLaren's tire call under the safety car? Drop me a line via email. Sabrina at 2guysagirlandf1.com. Have you rated and reviewed us in your favorite podcast app yet? If not, please take a moment to do so now. New to the podcast? If so, check out earlier episodes where John, Dick, and I share our F1 origin stories. Thank you to our followers who are supporting the show. You are making this show possible. John, Dick, and I don't take it for granted. If you're not a member already, check out the support the show link in the episode notes. And with that, let me say, that ends this conversation. But rest assured, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.